Hello, I'm Rob Price. This season, we're exploring Agentic AI from the perspectives of those driving its evolution. Welcome to Futurise.
Well, welcome. My name is Patrick Debois, and I have been known to explore the concept of DevOps. And in recent years, I've been exploring more automation thanks to this new kind of fun thing we call generative AI and agents. And today, that's what we're going to talk about.
Patrick, I saw you present at the AI for the Rest of Us conference earlier, a couple of months ago. And I remember looking at some of the way that you brought some slides together. Very different perspective from a lot of the other people who were talking. And I think it's interesting I did some work in a global payments business around getting us all to have a DevOps mentality and multidisciplinary and removing blockers. And talk a bit about that link between your shift in terms of at the heart of DevOps to what is becoming an agentic world, even though many of us don't quite understand what that is at the moment.
So, at the core, for me at least, of DevOps was initially a lot about collaboration. It was a time that we were throwing software over the wall, and it wasn't that streamlined. So there was definitely kind of a baseline setting of what we want to have achieved and getting things done. Agile was new, the cloud was new, and we're all kind of progressing along that journey. I think there's a lot of people who equate this with oh, then we build our pipeline and our tests and we do the automation on this. And then they often think like, well, then we don't need to talk anymore, right? Because it's all automated. And actually the problem went away of not collaborating because it kind of, we have a joint way of collaborating on this. Now, we learn a ton about like how automation is influencing the way we collaborate, the feedback we're getting, the more robust things we can build, the more kind of bigger abstractions we can build, the more it's tuned to business requirements. So we've seen a build up from, oh, it's about moving a war file or all the way up to, well, tomorrow we need to test whether the business actually wants a certain feature and let's get it out in production and get feedback as soon as we can to kind of drive that. This is where I see the curve going up from initial automation. Let's say that was code in the past. Oh, let's have an LLM generate some code. Oh, good, right? Okay. But there's so many different perspectives, and this feels like the manual way of setting up CI/CD pipeline, right? Oh, well, yes, we can write a script and it's all fun. But more and more, we're thinking about, okay, but we don't want to do this manually. So how can we take this to the next maturity level? And then often the whole concept of tests comes up, and we need to have guardrails. We need some specifications that it's running. And what you see now is that with the agents, you start having that, okay, we give them a goal, a kind of a direction, much like we give teams a direction, like this is what we want to build. And then they go off and they kind of go. Now, we learned that there's a game of telephone where context is lost and, a waiting game of asynchronous things. And that's interesting in the way that like agents currently feel like we're pushing not from the instant babysitting of the code to something that is done kind of on a longer term. It comes back to us when it's needed, when it fails, when there's something that needs to be done. And that's kind of another level of the learning in the DevOps journey is that while the initial was a lot about the automation, part of the thing that we became more managing the system and kind of dealing operationally with the system and not having to build it over and over again. And so we started having bigger abstractions. And then eventually our role was to supervise whether it was good or it was not good. And we also were, learned how to deal with failure way more. So now most of the cases when people do something in agents and the fact that it's asynchronous, well, it can come back with not so good results. And we can have the whole discussion about, oh, it was underspecified or we did not give it enough context. but sometimes technology or it's just going to a loop. And so that situational awareness in DevOps led us also to think about things like, well, initially we were all thinking this cannot fail, right? Like systems cannot go down. And then our mindset actually shifted to, well, what if we assume failure? What if we architect for failure? And then that allows us to iterate and innovate even faster because then we get the feedback in there. And that's also where I see actually the agents kind of evolving into. We know that it's not going to be perfect and the perfect specification will not exist, but the faster they get, that feedback cycle will give us insights that otherwise will take us a long time of dealing with.
There's so many things I need to pick up on. I mean, in part, I'm now going back to the early days or my early days around DevOps, where I'd got people with an application background versus people with an infrastructure background trying to kind of interact and do things effectively together. As my kind of new basis for thinking about agents and humans. But I mean, the point around optimizing and feedback, it's the thing that I'm talking about day in, day out at the moment, because it's that understanding that an agent team is a collaboration. I mean, I don't like making them too much about people, but it's about a colleague or a group of colleagues with which you're interacting. Are there other lessons then that we can take in terms of if we think about what does an effective agentic human team need to look like and how might it work? Are there other lessons that we can take from some of the patterns of DevOps or the metrics of DevOps that infer what great looks like?
Well, one really obvious one is the fact that we were starting to advocate DevOps teams of people sitting together. That was about like gathering shared context and as much context as you needed to do your role. So that is the similar thing with the agents. The more context you feed them, the more they see, the more they can kind of attune to what they need to do. And that's that same kind of aspect has been going on for years of overlapping knowledges over multiple domain experts kind of collaborating. So that's definitely something there. The resilience is already something I touched on. Like once we had the automation, the guardrails, how do you kind of make it fail safely? And I think many have tried to initially, ironically, one of the tools in DevOps space was CF Engine, which was built around agents, but nobody trusted it. And nobody could like understand the autonomy of a system correcting things in there. So only kind of a few kind of got into that mindset that it was, well, we specify the rules and we have trust in the system kind of building things up. So there's definitely a relationship now going on. Like some people will want to babysit the agent and some will kind of like be very good at dealing whatever it brings, like the scouting or the new ID, it kind of brings back. Now, the more we got into resilience and testing and more operating the system, we learned that we're really bad at dealing with the situation when it doesn't work. And that's when chaos engineering entered the game. It was helping us to train for this. And I think part of maybe what we're seeing now is the knowledge capturing, the training, the educational things that we're getting back from the agents, that they're on the one hand, a great example I always give is the Devin coding agent. It helps you do faster coding, and it's an agent that goes off into a certain aspect. But it also asks you the question, we think this is really important for your problem. So it challenges you to kind of capture the knowledge. And so it's a benefit from the human when it kind of jumps into an unknown situation, an unknown context, but it also helps the agent actually to understand your thoughts better as the domain expert. And that's kind of the other level of elevating this to a business and then the training and learning aspects. And maybe we'll eventually go from continuous delivery to continuous learning and to continuous knowledge extraction. Because in a way, we've been doing knowledge management for a long time, but it was always clunky humans with loss of memory and people moving in and out of company. We tried it for a while with the semantic web on gathering the knowledge, but I think we learned that building taxonomies by asking everybody was really hard. And so kind of that more organic situation was quite useful. I've implemented a few search systems that use taxonomies and then the regular keyword search. And I remember one of the topics that always come up is that the humans wanted to have an override to specify which results go on top because they know best. And so that kind of collaboration between, well, the system is feeding us solutions and it's good, but we'll have that override in certain places. That's another thing I guess we learned in the DevOps is kind of having what taps into a little bit of observability and kind of dealing with emerging situations, and we don't know it ahead of time. And that's also where I feel that that undeterministic from agent doing certain things, it's an exploratory things. A lot of people try to, micromanage the agents. It
Yeah.
needs to do exactly this and set like, but like, what about like it helping you come up with new ways of seeing things differently? And that's also that aspect of rethinking your workflow, rethinking how you do what you need is another aspect that over the years of DevOps transformations kind of helped in there. And then the agent is challenges us with the same things I feel right now.
Is there something around in that a handshake? So I mean, early in that answer, in essence, you were saying, or almost implying that there needed not to be a subserviency of the agent. So in a sense, and that makes sense if I think about a DevOps team. It's kind of everyone's got a role and everyone's got a voice within that. And therefore, are we actually saying that agents should be able to suggest or challenge or request further information to enable them to make a better job of the task that they're being asked to do?
Yeah. It reminds well, your remark made me think of you build it, you run it. Like every team had that mantra of okay, we're going to tune what we need and how we operate so we can get the maximum out of the system. Now, I learned that over time, there's definitely value in that explorative and expressiveness, but there's also value in having a governance across, right? So that kind of, I would start seeing the same things. There's an exploratory phase and kind of your agent goes off, but there's a certain threshold or limits or guardrails, maybe people call it, that we're going to do it the same way. If I had it a few times where I am, let's take the example of generating code, and you have a few agents, the developer, the security, the operation person, and they all kind of are an agent and they work on a problem. Let's create me an amazing script to kind of list the files in the directory. You see all the perspectives coming in. Oh, security, I wanted to have this check, and all you had to do was ls, right? So it was the very simple thing, but there's like an over complexity that we're doing. So they all brought in their expressiveness, but kind of then you needed that overview of toning it down to, hey, we're all here together. We need to understand. Let's make it simpler and kind of more useful. But that kind of collaboration is interesting in a way that it allows people to bring their own stuff to the table the way they want it. Now, I found it useful if I would say, agent, please solve this. They go into a loop and they come and synchronously back. But I had it many times where I don't understand why they went like spinning in a certain loop. And so adding a little bit of structure like we do with sort of governance to the developer teams, I found that like imagine you have the agent running CrewAI, but you add a node graph to it, like a line graph, where it's like known states that I can understand. So you're not going wild and thinking like, okay, I'm gonna phone Rob to see how I solve the problem, right? It's not like a state we want to have it go into, but it's like putting a little bit of structure in the unstructured. So, but that's kind of the challenge of the balance. And you actually see the same thing with image generation, where you say, I can do a prompt, it creates an image, but I don't have the expressiveness. And then people start putting in, hey, but maybe the body looks like this, maybe that looks like that. So you add enough structure to kind of nudge it and kind of limit it. And I would say with the agents, it's the same thing. You don't want to have the rogue agents without, and I'm not talking about safety guardrails, but also kind of like the mental model of kind of solving things while maintaining the creativity. And it's the same problem you have with, a big company having multiple teams. You want them to be creative, but you also want them to be kind of a little bit like, so we can have team members jump from one team to the other. So it's not a completely different workflow as well.
No, absolutely. And we found in some of the work that we've been doing that in essence, for example, we've got a critical friend agent, whose job it is to look at the work and question and try and refine. And so the way in which we kind of build a persona around some of the activities as part of overall team design,
Mhm.
increasingly we see as it's a bit of an art form. But then of course it always was about people too. I mean, you would always determine how do I get the right types of not only capability but actually also kind of behaviors to bring a effectively a high performing team together. So how, I mean, is there a review yet about if I'm designing a high performing hybrid team, what are there frameworks, are there suggestions around which roles would be optimally done by humans or which roles would be optimally done by agents? And I guess there's some that could be done by either, dependent on organizational decisions. Is there any guidance out there that you've or maybe previous work that kind of may be applicable in the same way as clearly kind of some of the DevOps work is?
Yeah. I am still a believer in a way that the technology is inherently flawed. So I make the assumption that it's gonna fail right now. So if I can make the analogy with if I have a good test framework, I can have the interim joining the company um, to push the production from day one because it will be caught and it's designed to deal with kind of those things. So imagine you don't have that safety net and you know it's going to fail, then you have a bigger problem. You are still in the manifold verification kind of things that people have to kind of worry about. A lot of people kind of complain if an agent is not giving useful results. That like, why are we doing this? Even like we're waiting so long, waiting maybe longer than talking to a human directly to kind of go on there. Now, so what kind of task you give to the agents? Well, again, it depends on your maturity and how you're set up on like your safety net and what it's allowed to do. And then I would say, given the automation that we've done in DevOps, people said automate all the things, right? So there was this mantra, and it was directional, but a lot of people kind of went very far in one area and kind of completely dismissed another part. So I always explain this like you have a barrel and you have the sides of the barrel, and imagine the water is in the barrel. If one of the sides is actually quite low, right, the water will leak it out through that side. And even if the others are high, so the approach would be is that you look at your workflow and you actually do not over automate one part, but you kind of look at like the different parts in your workflow that you're doing and kind of level them up like more like in a spiral way than kind of doing it on one piece at a time. The judgment, I guess, is still deciding on the human part, but all the other things you can automate. Then there's the aspect of cost. Is it like costly or not? Am I making that call? Agents can have your bill, quite high if you don't put them in the right constraints and kind of move there. But besides of that, I think your mind is actually the limit in a certain way. And I still feel that people are like, I often tell them, you're not dreaming big enough on what you can do. Um, a lot of people come to me with, oh, I want to use the agents and LLM to kind of solve incident responses. And so the first thing they do is they collect all the information of, context, why it went wrong, the log files, and things. And then they create this whole synthesis and then send it off to the engineer having to solve this. And I tell them, so why are you still sending that email? Why are you not defining the system that actually spins up 5 instances, tries the solutions, and then come back to the end user, and then we'll have a discussion. So that kind of limiting fact of what it can do, and maybe it's try 5 solutions while the engineer cannot do 5 solutions at the same time. But again, there's a cost aspect, there's a maturity aspect, like can you spin up that environment 5 times? A lot of people are, oh, that's going to be hard. And so that will be an evolving of kind of the teams while they're getting used to this, and then kind of dreaming of doing it like bigger things. And that's the step-by-step learning there.
And of course, we're right at the start, aren't we? So, I mean, there'll be a continued evolving voyage of discovery for organizations as they keep extending the boundary. There's probably something there around how do we know what success looks like? Well, we're probably going to have to reevaluate that question on almost a daily or weekly basis as kind of organizations continue to understand. I think I'd like to perhaps finish with one of the questions that keeps coming up that I genuinely don't know the answer to, but I'm wondering if there's something, again, back in DevOps, because I remember having conversations with people around the metrics of DevOps that implied what success looked like. And that's agent performance. So how do we know what's a good agent versus a less good agent?
Yeah. Well, we learned it wasn't about the busy factor or the lines of code or the number of tickets you kind of solved. I think we kind of tried to evolve into more business-centric things. You saw that in the monitoring systems. It wasn't about what's the response time of my API. It was about how many sales can we do. So we went up to kind of that level. And that's why, again, we're all looking to the future, but would that mean that the incentive is actually for the agent to take into account like what's cost effective, what we need to do, how we need to do it, and then like how well are we contributing to the business aspect as well? Like what have we solved? What were we doing? Now that could be internally, otherwise it will take us like 5 hours to research this whole piece, and that's money saved, and that's the quantification. We're not going to do the metric of how many CPUs you spun up, because that's kind of like not relevant. But it could also be externally, like how much faster did we solve tickets, how much. So those are like more like business requirements. And I know some people put it like they're weighing the investments much like you would have. I'm investing in hiring 2 employees. Okay, what's kind of their return, or were they useful, or kind of how they contribute to the bigger picture? And that's the same thing with humans. Some will help on streamlining internal processes, some will do like some knowledge work, some will kind of help others. So I see definitely a similarity on kind of giving them incentives. The nice thing with the agents is maybe more that we can track them in an easier way, and so we can quantify. Okay, this is what it did. This is what it cost, and going from there. And it's probably less idle, or it needs less downtime. Although we could debate about that, like. Even in the ideal thing, CI/CD pipelines go down, agents will go down, they go into a loop. So there's definitely kind of all the error states that maybe a human can go into. But that kind of valuation of the business incentive, look at it like the investment. I'm gonna build that agent system because this is kind of what I look from return. Now, what the return is, that could be learning, could be helping, could be faster, could be sell more products, and that's kind of the same thing. So that's what I would look at it.
It's interesting. I mean, effectively, we've got an equation that's what's the business outcome that I get, and what's the cost of the work that I've done. And the cost isn't necessarily a financial cost. The cost could
Yeah,
be energy. The cost could be expressed in a number of different terms. But at least
yeah,
if we've got the ability to, and there's no reason, of course, why we can't generate those equations, then we can then begin to calibrate the tasks that the agent teams then continue to do to
yeah.
optimize to those things.
Yeah, but it's a tricky thing in a way that and part of DevOps was looking at the company more as a whole and optimizing the whole. So if you're optimizing for, hey, I can do faster learning and I take all the the GPUs or whatever from somebody else, like that might not be the useful thing. So you're still looking, have to look at the bigger picture, what you're kind of optimizing. And in reality, in a company, you often have conflicting things like, we're betting on two horses. We're seeing what sticks. We don't know certain factor. Um, but yeah, that is just inherent of running a business, and that won't be solved by the agents of heavy conflicting. But I think the fact that maybe the feedback channels will be faster, we'll see the conflicts and have to kind of make the decisions faster on the conflicts where sometimes a project can go into like a spin for 3 months 6 months, and we'll have to see how it evolves before we can kind of pull the plug, or we see adoption, or we see a certain result. And that's likely going to be different with agents because they're like very much focused, could be working 24 hours to kind of like get certain results. And that's the exciting part in a way that IDs might get faster because you're learning from the feedback faster there as well.
Patrick, it's been a pleasure. I suspect we could probably go on for about 2 days, let alone 20 minutes. Maybe we need to do a part two, but that was brilliant. And thank you for taking time to join the podcast.
Yeah, and let's look forward to 2025, the year for the agents. Probably not Linux on the desktop this time.
Cool. Thank you.